Welcome to the Anatomy of a Comedy Skit, the #1 tutorial on how to write funny stuff, said by someone at some point, I'm sure. In this two-part tape, we'll go over the basic structure of a comedy skit, the many features of comedy skits, how you can write them, different techniques, and how you yourself can write one at home. This is tape 1, the vitals. Bam! So, to start off, you have to come up with a main joke or narrative. Everything has a concept. You can't really get around that much. After all, if you want to start thinking of making a skit, you have to start thinking about something to think about to make the skit about. Even a skit about having no idea for the skit has an idea. It's the having no idea is the idea for the skit. Did that make sense? So you need to have an idea. So let's start this lesson with an activity of sorts. Pull out a piece of paper, or write on your phone, or literally anything, and write any word. Whatever word comes to your head right now. Go. It could be literally anything. And to prove that, I'm going to improvise what I'm going to write on this chalkboard down right now. Original, I know. Now that I have this word written down, let's try and bounce off of it to come up with an idea. Well, what happens with a chalkboard? People write on it, right? So people write on it. So how about there's two guys in a room and the chalkboard keeps writing on itself? Or maybe not even that. Maybe it's a person is being accused of writing something stupid on a chalkboard and it just keeps escalating from there. Like, oh, I accuse you of drawing a little penis on a chalkboard. Oh, you shouldn't have done that. And then he's like, no, I didn't do that. And it's like, oh yeah? Well, did you also not do that? And it's something completely outrageous on the rest of the chalkboard. That'd be a funny idea. I'm gonna do that. So now, we have an idea. And for now, we're gonna head back over there to the vitals. Step 2 of the vitals is conflict. From conflict arises story. Most stories, if not all stories, have a form of conflict. A wants 1, B wants 2, so A must overcome B to reach the end of the plot. Comedy skits often follow a similar form of conflict blueprint, such as the skits that we are discussing today follow a pretty specific blueprint. A thinks 1, B thinks 2. They butt heads for a while, eventually 3 happens, where there are 2 characters who think opposing things. They butt heads for a while, and then eventually something unexpected happens, and then thus, comedy. So let's continue our activity from earlier. Take your initial idea that you wrote on your paper, and think of a couple of viewpoints that a character could have on it. For example, if your word is murder, you could have 2 characters that one of them doesn't seem to care at all that someone's been murdered, and the other person cares a lot that the person is murdered and thinks that it's morally bad. That creates a conflict that you can write your skit around. So in this case, with my little skit, the conflict seems pretty obvious. There's a teacher or some authority accusing an innocent bystander. The conflict is very clear. The teacher believes that he has written on the chalkboard, and thus the teacher is very insistent on him admitting it. Whereas the innocent bystander is very insistent on the fact that he did not, in fact, write on the chalkboard, and is very insistent on convincing the teacher that he did not do so. So now, we have created a conflict that we can bounce off of when we get back to the activity. But right now, we're going to go back to the vitals. On to step 3, develop your conflict. Now you're going to want to do this without ignoring, but bouncing off of the original idea. Now that you have a conflict, let's develop it. What happens in this skit? How do we get from point A to point 2? Well, let me tell you, you might not want to do this. Making a whole skit about one singular bit can be good, but look at all this free real estate down here. Look at all of that free real estate. We want to take advantage of this free real estate to boost the funny. Okay, now let's apply that principle to the skit that we have over here. So our main bit is the fact that the chalkboard is writing on itself. So what are some mini bits we could put? Well, something that happens with chalkboards is when you clean the eraser, it makes a lot of dust. Maybe I could make a joke about that somewhere. Maybe the teacher will mock the innocent bystander's excuses. Maybe the teacher is really ridiculous with the punishments, and they keep escalating the punishment every single time that there's a new drawing on the board. Maybe that's another one. These are 3 small bits that I am going to try and fit underneath this overall art. But that's up to later me. Right now, I've just come up with the bits themselves, and when I write the script, I will have to take those into consideration. But for now, vitals. Now we are on to step 4. Eventually, you're going to have to conclude the conflict. The skit inevitably has to end. Make it as long as you like, though. Experiment. That's what art's all about, after all. But I'd say it's about time that we finish up that skit over there. But first, how are we going to do that? The best way to do this is to make sure all loose ends are tied up. It, of course, doesn't have to be a nice bow that they're tied in, but tie them nonetheless. For example, let's say you were making a skit about a guy who was trying to land a skateboard trick. Well, you could finish it with him landing it. You could finish it with him not landing it. You could also finish it with him getting hit by a car and being unable to do the trick anymore. The limits are absolutely endless if you listen to your knob. Now, I suggest you don't finish up your main arc until you've finished up all these other little ones. But of course, experimentation is very welcome with this format. And sometimes, finishing an off bit right over there can sometimes make a skit better. Sometimes, starting a bit with a different bit can sometimes also make it better. Experimentation, it's very important. Now let's complete this skit. As you can see, we have the mini bits that we have in the middle, but we have not decided what happens at the end yet. So, let's do that. Now, what is a twist that could make the initial joke of the teacher accusing the innocent bystander of drawing stupid things on the board funny? We've got to subvert the viewer's expectations. And what are the viewer's expectations right now? Well, maybe the expectation is that the innocent bystander isn't so innocent. Maybe the expectation is that a different person drew them. Yeah, or maybe the expectation is that the chalkboard is haunted and it's just kind of trying to frame this guy. There are so many things you could do. But what I'm going to go with is a slight subversion of expectation. We're going to play into one of the things I just listed there, and I'm going to say the teacher did it. So the skit is going to happen, and in the end it will be revealed that the teacher is just framing the student because he didn't like it. Simple as that. So right here, we have a finished skit idea. Of course, needs some polish, like a script and, you know, the rest of it, but that's a whole idea right there. Give yourself a hand. Okay, that's enough. Okay. Now, I'm going to take this idea. I'm going to go behind the scenes. I'm going to write a script. I'm going to film a skit. I'm going to film this skit specifically, and I'm going to show you that right now. Disgraceful. James Matthews, you get in here, young man. Yes, sir? Care to explain this? What do you mean? Would you care to explain why there was a penis drawn on my chalkboard, James? Well, I'd assume someone drew it. Oh, yes, sir. Someone must have. Yeah, and who would you suggest it was, James? I'm sorry, are you accusing me of drawing a penis on your chalkboard? I don't know, James. You tell me. Do you think you did something that earns you a detention during recess period? No. Also, this is a university. I'm not that childish. I don't have a recess, and you can't hold me for detention. And frankly, this baseless accusation reveals a shocking level of unprofessionalism of you as a teacher and oh my God, could you stop circling it? Mr. Matthews, raising your voice at a teacher. That sounds like a 1-week suspension to me. Really? Suspension for a penis drawing? Oh, but it isn't just the penis. What else is it then? This for a start. Mr. Carlson is a fuckwit? How could you even prove this was me? You have no evidence whatsoever. Anyone with a piece of chalk could have done that. Stop doing that! James. You just don't get it. I've already caught you. Your delinquent friends in class have ratted you out. Listen.
So who did you say did this? James Marshall. Matthews, you mean? Yeah, James Matthews. Saw him do the whole thing. And could you say what exactly James Matthews did into this microphone for me? Sure. James Matthews scribbled on the chalkboards. I seen him do it. All the way from the penis to the fuckwit.
That has to have been a joke, right?
Mr. Matthews, refuting the claims even when the evidence is in my own hands. You're building up quite a hefty sentence, young man. And that could lead to, like, 20, maybe 50 years in the state penitentiary.
I didn't even recognize that voice. And that story does not corroborate these claims. Because, as I have said before, I did not do this.
Oh yeah? You didn't?
Yeah, I didn't.
Neither of these two vandalations were you.
No.
Well, what about this one? Is that? Yes, it's me. And you're... Yes, I am. With yes. And as you can see, right in the bottom corner here is your signature, proving that you did this. That isn't even my signature, though. That just says I did this. Which I didn't. James. You have forced my hand. Oh, what, are you gonna erase it? What the hell? Stop it! Sir, I have asthma. Fine. If it'll get you to stop doing that, I did it. Justice is served. Can I go now? Oh, yes. You can leave whenever you want. If they changed the laws about life sentences and they just made it so you can just leave, the patrol car will be waiting downstairs, young man. You can go. I am so dropping your class. Oh, the look on his face. That's why we got an art degree, Mr. Carlson. That is why. Welcome to the Anatomy of a Skit, Tape 2. This time, we're going over the limbs. In this tape, we'll be covering more details about what we covered in Tape 1. Make sure you've watched that one before you've watched this. Although, if you haven't watched Tape 1, here's a short summary. So, to come up with an idea, you have to come up with a main joke, and then you have to... But I digress. You can always watch Tape 1 to review what I have just told you. In this tape, we'll cover different joke structures, setups, payoffs, and other stuff of the like that you can use as techniques to bolster your skit's comedy and funnies and other words. We're starting with number 1, repeating gags. Now, repeating gags are often a good tool to use when it comes to comedy. For example, let's say, how fragile are these chops? Let's say a couple of your arcs are actually the same joke multiple times. Well, each time has to be a bit different, and it's kind of got to escalate every single time. That way, the setup kind of matches the amount of punchline that there is for this joke. After all, a joke that happens multiple times in a video is going to build up more anticipation for the punchline than a joke that just happens once in a video. It's kind of like making a big promise to your audience that this one's going to be a really good one. This often leads to repeating gags being a part of the reason that the skit ends, such as like the repeating gag happens and then the last punchline actually finishes up the entire narrative of the skit. So the main joke kind of ties in with the repeating gag of the skit. Makes it feel a lot more final because of how much build-up there's been throughout all of the other little repeating gags throughout the video. And repeating gags can have as big of a gap as you want between each occurrence. There could be 2 at the beginning, right next to each other, and then 1 right at the end, to try to kind of like tie it all back together. In fact, this gap is actually quite important because the audience could forget that these jokes even happen, which makes this joke hit even harder. It makes it, wait! As you can tell, repeating gags can be good to emphasize a joke. The more something happens, the more the audience focuses on it, and the more the audience finds it funny, because it happened before. Now on to number 2. Every setup should have a payoff. Setup and payoff may have been a term that you've heard before, and you're going to want to keep it in mind when you're writing, because every line in a comedy skit could have a potential comedic payoff later in the skit. In a perfect world, your entire skit should just be a series of setups and payoffs. As you can see, these are the setups and those are the payoffs. Now you don't have to give the payoff for each setup immediately after each one. Try to mingle them around a little bit. Set up 2 payoffs and then maybe give the first one, and then set up another one, and then give the setup, the payoff of the third one before the second one, and then the fourth one at the end, and then pay off for the entire skit altogether. Did that make sense? Overall, experiment with where you place your setups and where you place your payoffs in your skit. It can be quite rewarding when you look back at the skit, and it's a bunch of intermingled setups and payoffs. It makes it feel very tightly, but if you're ever in doubt, always refer back to this sort of structure. Time for number 3. Subvert expectations occasionally. Here is a normal interaction.
Hey, how was your dentist appointment? Good, although it hurt a little bit, but my teeth are clean. Splendid.
There wasn't much humor in that interaction. If you have an interaction like that in a comedy skit, unless it serves a larger purpose overall in the main plot of the skit, scrap it. There is probably a funnier way to get the information across that you are trying to get across. A good joke is one that is surprising, yet still has its own sense of inevitability in the larger part of the skit. So you're gonna wanna surprise the viewer on their first watch, but it's not going to confuse them. You shouldn't confuse the viewer, or else they're gonna lose interest in the skit. Now this can come from the setup.
Hey, how was your dentist appointment with the kleptomaniac dentist?
Good.
Splendid.
Or it can come from the payoff. Each of those holds their own sort of comedic value. But in all of them, there is a certain form of absurdity to it all. Absurdity can be an important thing in comedy, but you have full control over how much absurdity you can include. Here's an interaction that has the absurdity turned up all the way.
Hey, how was your dentist appointment? Huzzah! What?
As you can see, that amount of random and bizarre humor can have its place, but use it sparingly or it can get tiresome and predictable and just not funny. And now we're on to number 4. Pausing is important. That one actually wasn't meant to happen. Pauses create an environment for good comedic timing. You have to know when something is said and when it should be said, more importantly. And you can use this in a variety of ways, such as turning up the absurdity of the pause itself. The large gap in time from when you heard that hit the ground and from when I dropped it created a comedic value in and of itself in that random little motion. But that's not the kind of pause I'm really referring to. More like this.
Hey man, did you hear that someone in the building is secretly a camouflaged owl?
What? Who? I'm gonna leave now. I never want to talk to you again. As you can see, the pause created a sort of comedic value that the absence of a pause would not have otherwise.
Hey man, did you hear that someone in the building is secretly a camouflaged owl?
What? Who? I'm gonna leave now. I'm never gonna talk to you again. Now I will admit, both of those interactions have their own sense of comedic value, but pauses still have their own place in a skit. Think of it as another tool in your growing toolbox of writing techniques that you can use when you will see fit. Finally, number 5, videography stuff. This includes lights, the camera angle, the camera positioning, everything involving the more technical side of everything. It's important to vary your shots when you can. While a shot or reverse shot can sometimes be all you need, maybe film 2 versions of that back and forth to throw some variety. Throw the occasional 2-shot in to bring the viewer back into the space. And if you want a character to feel more powerful than another, remember that a high-angle, low-angle pairing often works for that. If you want to convey tone, remember that the best tool in your arsenal, the most important tool in your arsenal, is your camera. It's kind of the thing that makes the whole making skits thing possible in the first place. Watch. That's what the video would be if we didn't have a camera. Pretty crazy, I know. Well, that about wraps up the anatomy of a comedy skit. Now don't write one or improvise one. Those can be funny too. There's a lot I did not touch on in this tutorial. So experiment. Ask your friends for help. Do whatever you think would be good for the video. Or for yourselves. I don't really know. And with that, have a nice day.